Hello, today I want to share with you the uniform of Melvin James. So, what's unique about Melvin James is he won the nation's second highest award for valor, but he did not earn the Navy Cross. So, we'll get into that story of how a Marine won the Army's Distinguished Service Cross. So, Melvin James was born March 31st, 1928. He lived at 811 North Park in Independence, Missouri, graduated high school there, and enlisted in August of 1948. He enlisted as a rifleman, went through infantry training battalion, and was assigned to the 5th Marine Regiment as a rifleman. When 3-5 was formed, which is a unique part of 3-5's history, 3-5 was formed in late 1949 and was really composited of the Guam garrison. They brought that garrison back from Guam and created 3-5 because at that time, 5th Marines was the only regiment in the 1st Marine Division, and it only had 2 battalions. So 3-5 was formed, and Melvin James presumably was a pretty high-performing Marine, was transferred to 3-5 and became a fire team leader as a lot of the Marines who were stationed in Guam were at the end of their contracts and were leaving the Marine Corps. So he was a fire team leader, was transferred to Howe Company 3-5, and on July 12th, 1950, after North Korea invaded South Korea, was sent as part of the 1st Marine Brigade to Korea. Now, they embarked on ship believing they would go to Japan, train up, and prepare for combat in Korea. The situation at the Pusan perimeter was so dire, basically a 30 by 60 mile perimeter being held by a few thread-bone divisions of the 8th Army. So the 5th Marine Regiment, along with their associated air wing, landed at Pusan on the night of August 2nd. So I want to describe the scene because they land in a little bit of chaos. Of course, I go to the authority, which is Dark Horse 6, written by Lieutenant Colonel Taplett, who was 3-5's battalion commander through the entire opening days of Korea through Chosin. And he has this to say about the landing. And also, I chose to begin this passage a little bit earlier because it discusses some of the family life. And after coming off the ball in the Marine Corps message and the Commandant's words about spouses and families, I thought this was a pretty interesting note. So Colonel Taplett writes that, I remember the drastic and sudden change in our lives, just like Pearl Harbor changed the lives of all of us 8 years before. The days from 7 July to the sailing date of 14 July were the most hectic and trying for all of us, not to mention the stress placed on the wives and children. I all too well understand the agony of family separations. In my case, leaving a pregnant wife with 2 very young children. We worked around the clock to the dismay of our families. Little did I realize that our families living in military quarters on base would be subject to the indignity of being ordered to vacate their quarters within 2 weeks after our sailing on 14 July. And worse, our families would not receive their pay allotments until September. This sorry news would be received after we had been baptized by hostile North Korean fire at Qingdong-ni and the Sechon offensive. Talk about a morale booster. As one of the men said, to think we came all this way to this godforsaken place for the stupid treatment of our families. In my case, my wife Patricia, expecting our 3rd child, could not qualify for a housing mortgage because I was considered a poor risk, the Lieutenant Colonel of the Marine Corps. Nor could she return to our apartment in Park Merced because they would not accept single women with children. I remember also the days at the end of World War II how Marine Corps personnel sacrificed heavily in the quality of their family life in order to maintain combat readiness. This was just part of the Marine Corps tradition, which was not apparent or properly understood by our civilian compatriots and still isn't today. And I would argue maybe still isn't today. So talking about landing at Pusan. So docking shortly after the sun disappeared behind the ridge to the west of Pusan, offloading began in earnest, although we still had no idea where we were going. Later that evening, General Craig had held a meeting of all the unit commanders. The Army officers briefed us of the critical situation facing the 8th Army and the dire threat to the Pusan port facilities. I can't read today. The briefing provided little worthwhile information, but freely expressed the pervading gloom and doom attitude which characterized the Army troops and their leaders in those early days. However, they did drive home to us the existing critical North Korean threat to the Pusan port facilities. We came away from this intelligence briefing with the feeling that doomsday was at hand and we were soon to participate in covering another Dunkirk-type operation. So Dunkirk, a reference to the early days of World War II, where the British basically had to evacuate their army from mainland Europe at the French port of Dunkirk. So, pretty interesting note about kind of the doom and gloom and the situation facing the Marines as they landed. And think Melvin James, real young Marine, fire team leader, had not been tested in combat yet, and landing at a port at night, kind of the Army troops and the South Koreans are panicked. The Marines are like stealing Army vehicles to get their stuff prepared. And at this point, 3-5 takes an old coal train to the front line. 1-5 and 2-5 get trucked to the front lines. 3-5 is in like this old small gauge railway car. So on August 6th, 3-5, so 3 days later, 3-5 is ordered to Changyang-ni to relieve the 2nd of the 27th Infantry Regiment. I think that's how the Army says it. 2nd Battalion, 27th Infantry Regiment. And I'll go into that here again, referencing Dark Horse 6 of basically 3-5's first taste of combat, and an interesting note about kind of the culture of 3-5 at that time. So the officers and men of the 3rd Battalion joined the 5th Marine Regiment on their return from Guam in early 1950. For some reason or another, after their arrival in Camp Pendleton, they always felt like they were outsiders, or the Johnny-come-lately to Colonel Victor Krulak's 5th Regiment. My observation tended to support their feeling. In some instances, they were treated that way. Thus, my men and I considered it an honor to be designated as the first unit of the 1st Marine Brigade to be committed to combat in Korea. The mission was to be the first of many separate critical missions later assigned to 3-5. As the fighting progressed, my men began to refer to themselves as a bunch of lone wolves. They even designed their own flag depicting a lone wolf baying at the full moon. There was no doubt I inherited a cocky, confident, and well-trained outfit. So just an interesting note about the culture in 3-5. They realized they were kind of new to the regiment. 1-5 and 2-5 had been training together. 3-5 kind of that late form Guam garrison. An interesting note about that flag. Trying to recreate that for the Marines so we can kind of bring back that 3-5, that part of that 3-5 culture. So 3-5 basically takes over the positions of the 2nd of the 27th. They inherit this Army position. They've been kind of battered. So they put a Marine battalion in here to bear the brunt of an oncoming North Korean assault. So at this time, 3-5 basically lets its first blood out on 7th August. Basically, Howe Company with Melvin James included on the morning of August 7th are subject to a North Korean attack. They drive off the attack, but they also notice that the North Koreans have occupied the high ground around their positions, or in front of their positions. That H Company commander talks to Colonel Taplett, and they discuss basically pushing the North Koreans off of that position. So again, going back to Dark Horse 6. So this is the first offensive action of 3-5 and basically the Marines in Korea. This is the first offensive action for all those. So early on the morning of 8 August, Captain Fagan reported a large number of enemy moving into positions on a higher ridge just north of his position. The North Koreans had discovered the large gap existing between our troops defending Chindong-ni and the Army units miles to our north. This was a critical North Korean move, as our occupation of the higher ridge would interdict our main supply route as a curve to the east towards Pusan and would interfere with the forward deployment of the brigade. After several airstrikes and an artillery preparation, I ordered Fagan to destroy the NKPA force some 300 yards north of his position. Enemy fire, including close-range grenade action, halted the initial attack by 2nd Lieutenant John O. Williams' platoon. To regain the initiative, Fagan ordered his 3rd platoon into the attack. Receiving no response from the platoon leader, Joe confronted the lieutenant. After failing to obtain a satisfactory answer for his lack of aggressiveness, he relieved the officer and sent him back to the battalion command post. Joe took personal command of the platoon and successfully cleared the ridge. While at Camp Pendleton, the relieved officer was considered the outstanding officer of his rank. However, he told Joe and me that he had no stomach for combat. Neither Fagan nor I would subject our Marines to such an officer. So Leaving Dark Horse 6, I'm going to go to Bill Sloan's The Darkest Summer. Bill Sloan is a great author. This is a great book. Any Bill Sloan really marine book is going to be fantastic, and I highly recommend this book as well as some of Bill Sloan's others. But he talks about that action as well. So early on August 8th, the Marines' first small-scale probing attack on the lower hill by the 1st Platoon of H Company was sharply repulsed by NK small arms and grenades. A short time later, Captain Joseph C. Fagan, H Company's CO, relayed to Taplett's order for the 3rd Platoon to pass through the 1st to resume the assault, a much-practiced Marine strategy to keep fresh troops always on the point of attack, but the lieutenant leading the 3rd Platoon failed to respond. Rushing forward from his CP, Fagan confronted the young officer. "I told you to attack," he said. "What the hell's the matter with you?" The lieutenant replied, "We've already taken casualties, and I've seen my wounded rolling helplessly down the hill, sir. I've got no stomach for sending more men to their deaths." Fagan shook his head in disbelief. The recalcitrant officer had compiled an outstanding record at Camp Pendleton, but in the cauldron of actual combat, his nerves had snapped. "Then you've got no business leading a platoon," Fagan said. "I'm giving you an order, Lieutenant." "I can't do it, sir," the lieutenant said, staring at the ground. "Then I'm relieving you," Fagan snapped. "Get out of here and go back to the battalion CP." Moments later, with Fagan personally in command, the platoon moved forward with restored confidence, inspired both by their CO's example and the encouragement of a small cadre of veteran NCOs. The riflemen charged across the exposed tableland towards Hill 255 in a wedge formation, with one squad at the apex and 2 others slightly to the rear, taking more casualties as they went, but never faltering. In this case, airstrikes and artillery had little effect against the enemy troops dug into the rocky crags of Hill 255 itself, and the final assault was bloody and hand-to-hand. While leading his squad, Sergeant John I. Wheatley fell severely wounded, along with several of his men. Sergeant Edward F. Barrett, with bullet wounds in his elbow and hip, lay helpless, exposed to the enemy fire until Fagan carried him to safety. In the struggle for the summit, Fagan's men had to clear the ridge one enemy foxhole at a time, with many NKPA troops fighting to their death. A squad, led by Corporal Melvin James, rolled up the enemy's left flank, earning James a Distinguished Service Cross, while an assault spearhead by Sergeant Ray Morgan and PFC Donald Terrio, each of whom wiped out an enemy machine gun and its crew, shattered the right flank. Both Morgan and Terrio were awarded Silver Stars. So that's Melvin James's action, and I have his actual citation here. So at that time, of course, 3-5 was assigned to, they were under Army Command. So 3-5 was under the 27th Infantry Regiment. They were detached from the brigade just for this action. That's why James received not a Navy Cross, but a Distinguished Service Cross. So Corporal Melvin James, the Distinguished Service Cross, distinguished himself by extraordinary heroism against the enemy while serving with a Marine Rifle Company in Korea on 8 August 1950. As a fire team leader of a rifle squad, Corporal James was advancing with his company in an attack along a steep bare ridgeline when they came under and were pinned down by heavy enemy machine gun and rifle fire. Corporal James, with absolute disregard for his own safety, repeatedly exposed himself to intense enemy fire in order to reorganize and direct the actions of his squad. As a result of his valiant efforts and courageous leadership, his company's line was reestablished, enabling it to regain fire superiority and continue the attack. With another Marine, he voluntarily made 6 perilous trips across terrain swept by enemy fire to evacuate 6 wounded comrades and facilitate prompt medical attention for them. Corporal James's display of outstanding courage and devotion to duty is in keeping with our most cherished ideals and reflects great credit upon himself and the military service. Entered federal service for Missouri by command of General MacArthur. So again, an Army citation, so the verbiage is a little different, and as well was signed by General MacArthur. So James would continue to fight through Pusan. He would land at Wolmy-Do during the Incheon invasion, fight through Seoul. He would again fight at Udom-ni in the Chosin Reservoir, and he would finally be wounded in the hand on December 2nd by shrapnel, but he would not be evacuated until December 11th. So likely he fought, was part of the walking wounded, continued to fight with Howe Company until the units reached the port of Yongsan and were able to evacuate him. So additionally, I have... A letter from General Craig, which discusses his awarding of the Distinguished Service Cross to James. And of course, I exited out of that. So I got to find it. So in his file, James mentioned, hey, I never got my Distinguished Service Cross. So he messages General Craig, who is the commander of the 1st Marine Brigade. And General Craig writes him this letter. Dear Mr. James, it was nice to hear from you after all these years since we served together in Korea. I'm sorry to hear that you never received the citation for your heroic action on August 8, 1950, when you led your squad against the flank of a North Korean position which was holding up the advance of our forces. Your action was instrumental in helping to eliminate the enemy position and further our advance. You were recommended for the award of the Army Distinguished Service Cross. It was approved by Regimental Commander Lieutenant Colonel Murray, the Commanding General, 1st Provisional Marine Brigade, and the Commanding General, 8th U.S. Army, whom the brigade was serving with at the time. Later, while we were serving with the 1st Marine Division in North Korea, your medal was received from the U.S. Army. I was designated to deliver the award to you and had the privilege of personally pinning it on your blouse at a point on the road leading up to the chosen reservoir. The citation for your decoration was never received by me when the medal was given to me for delivery to you. Heavy combat and the final pullout from North Korea by American forces created much confusion a short time later. It is possible that your citation was lost by a higher echelon at that time. And he goes on about some administrative things, but I just thought it was interesting that General Craig remembered pinning it on Corporal James's uniform on the march up to the chosen reservoir before the subsequent withdrawal. So again, a few weeks later at Chosen, then Sergeant James, he got promoted early November, would be wounded and be pulled out of Korea after his wounds. I have a fit rep in his file that discusses his time as a sergeant, basically just covering the Chosen Reservoir period. And he's described as an excellent combat leader and courageous under fire. So I thought that was pretty interesting. And his fit rep was, I think, entirely under the excellent or outstanding column. So he would go on. He would serve in the reserves as an ordnance Marine in a wing squadron. I assume it was probably close to his home. And his fit reps there said, he was fantastic for unit morale and was really good about enforcing discipline and customs and courtesies, as I'm sure any good infantry NCO or staff NCO would be. So really interesting story. You don't see a lot of Marines with Distinguished Service Crosses. Corporal James fought through some of the toughest campaigns and was in the first engagement of the Marines in Korea and fought through some absolutely heroic things. I'm planning on doing a series or at least a longer video on the Chosen Reservoir where I'll reference Howe Company 3-5. And when I do, just know that they were being led by such fine leaders as Corporal James. So I hope you appreciate this video. I hope you appreciate all the history of our battalion and the Marines that we inherit this legacy from. And I hope these videos are helpful and inspire you to be a better Marine. Thanks.